Good evening, folks. Welcome to Shallibodhran, and in this episode, it's about mixing styles. And in this case, we're going back to trad music. Had to jump back to trad music because the original question that was sent to me in an email was about hornpipes in particular. And the nice thing about hornpipes is I like them because they're, for me, the most musical piece in Irish music with regards to any sort of drumming accompaniment to it. Because they're typically upbeat, they're typically happy sounding, and they're typically a nice influence to bounce around in the 4/4 times and whatnot. So the two that we're looking at is Tom of the Hill and Dwyer's hornpipe. And in this case, the issue that was brought to my attention was getting bored while playing hornpipes. Number one, how can you be bored? But number two, I understood the question as that there are part A's and part B's and whatnot, and how to kind of bounce back and forth between them. It makes a lot of sense in cases with reels where it's a much more sort of square sounding piece of music. But the hornpipe bounces around a little bit more. It doesn't really feel the same way. And in things like jigs, for example, it doesn't have that same sort of squareness to it. You can jump on reels and jigs faster than perhaps a hornpipe. So what I would like to sort of discuss and then go over a little bit with recording here is that how to bounce back and forth between two things. So one of my favorite ways of playing is sort of the bouncing. And if you've ever watched Seamus O'Kane playing, it's that sort of idea of the beat pattern of playing along with people, especially like Seamus O'Kane, who have a definitely has a sense of bouncing that's going back and forth. It has a particular sound to it. I like that a lot with regards to playing in hornpipes because you get a sense of that hop and lightness to it because you have a bounce to it coming up and then a landing, so to speak. It has almost like a comical character to it, a lot of flavor to it. But then in the case of other players, maybe taking a bit from Tommy Hayes and a little bit from even Eric Cunningham to some degree, and Ronan Snowdy, sort of mixing that all together, and then maybe not doing as much about the sort of the open tones, but maybe more of the that's where those doubles are coming in handy. So part of it is going to be bouncing between the that's a pretty easy one to go with. I'm going to be mixing it up a little bit, trying to give you some ideas of what I would do with it. But on the second parts of it, we're going to mix it up and try to do it without any of the open tones and try to keep more of a percussive. Try to figure out something how that's going to work and how to do so intuitively. So just for this bit, I'm not going to play through the whole thing, but I'm going to give you an idea of how I would sort of handle it. So let's see. Here we go. Hit it. Get a nice sense of the bounce. It's very nice and light. Helps having that mandolin. Here's the beat. Idea is to try to get a bounce set in the first and a percussive to the second. Okay? Let part B run through again. And here we go. We'll go to the rest of it later, but you can kind of see what I'm doing a bit. So the first bit I'm doing is that typical sort of feel. And I'm just following the actual piece of music. It helps when you hear something beforehand. You know, the old mantra of listen to something 5 to 10 times before you try it once, just so it gets something of it into your head. The second part of it, going into the part B, I'm actually kind of just playing everything almost entirely up here. And I'm just controlling the tension from the top. But the idea is to try to get just the more percussive sound of it versus the more tonal aspect of it. And then you notice that after part B is cycled through the second time and it kind of returns back on itself to go back into part A or to end that first half of the bit, I've jumped out of this. That sort of being comes back to that. And that's to get a little bit of part A back into part B's finish so it goes into part A on the next part. Okay? So we're going to jump into the second bit, which I believe is Dwyer's, and we'll see what we can do with that. There's A. A coming out again. Okay, B. Nice little descending bit. There we go. Can you hear it? It's like it's descending as you're playing. Right. 1, 2, go. General idea of how it'd be thrown together. You know, I think it's a little more easily in the first half of that, but it's nice to have that. I do love that little descending bit that slowly comes down. And there's so many ways to tackle it. I mean, if you're someone who's playing more of the double end stuff, you got that. Some of those doubles that come in handy, we're going da 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 1 2 1 2. Sort of idea. And that's one possibility, or you can sort of roll it back in with a and then roll it back out. And all I'm doing with that sort of thing is just and I'm making sure that I'm having a flat to accent it or a pop to accent it. That sort of idea. You know, part of more intricate playing with regards to just playing is that you're not just playing. You can actually get a lot of variety just from one place. It's like just placing your hand here. I can play above or below. such and such. In order to help make some of this a little more intricate and a little more interesting, I would start off by simply doing some basic stuff in a part A and then switching it around to part B. So maybe doing like a tonal drum aspect to part A and a percussive to part B, just like we did in the first half of it with Tom Hill. And then maybe later on, once you got that, changing it up with the different sounds that we made on the back. There's lots of sounds you can make. There's just a lot to throw in there. So as an exercise that might help down the road, start with something that starts off with part A. And then into the second bit, make it sound totally different. And you head back into it. And then when you get into the next part of it, the idea is that you just keep adding variations on the theme. Because remember, if you're playing a series of hornpipes together, you can use one beat pattern set and it will go nicely through the whole thing. But the important part, and some of the joy in Irish music, this is in Scottish music and Breton music, is that it intertwines with itself and then comes back out and then reintertwines with itself and comes back out. So there's always going to be a little bit of familiarity running through them. I think for anyone who plays a melody instrument, that's the hardest part, is putting together sets that have the pieces meld lovely of one into the other. And maybe that's how we as drummers should start thinking about that more often. It just bashes home the importance of knowing the music. And in the case of hornpipes, it's a little more difficult than doing reels and jigs and whatnot. But because it has that uppityness to it, you can always have some time to play with it. So maybe you don't want to go with that bouncing hit. Maybe that's not your thing, but maybe we can change that. Really accenting that upstart. That sort of thing. It sounds kind of more funky instead of a... You have... That's a bit of a hard part. But then there's a matter of, if you're playing in the sessional group, you can be sort of funky with it, but you don't want to be hammering it home quite loud. So maybe something that's a little more... Rule number one is that you play to the room and you play to the music. Remember, any accompanying instrument's job is to support the melody, at least in this style of music. It's not meant to lead. So the important thing is to take your permutation orchestrations in part A, part B, and as you go through the familiarity of it. In the case of hornpipes, in my opinion, is that you stay light, you stay on your toes as you're playing. And if you are a person who wants, like, which is kind of a heavier, that also suits it, but it's going to start changing it from maybe something that's not so much a hornpipe. Maybe it's accented similar to a hornpipe. It might sound more like a reel to some degree. If you want to stay light and wispy, maybe. If you're not a top end player, maybe something. One thing that I would not recommend doing a lot with especially with hornpipes and whatnot, is a continuous running hit. Like, it sounds a bit strange. to be judicious when you're doing this. If you're just going to play, there's going to create a problem in a lot of this, and that is that it's going to sound like it's being played too fast. It's not enough to know what to play, but how to play it and how to accent it. If you're just going, I'm still playing it, just accented wrong. I'm still in the same time signature. It just sounds flat. It sounds boring. But if you're always going, it's going to sound loud and obnoxious. You got to find something in your skills. You're no longer beginners now. You're moving into a much higher level. So you have to try to figure out how to control what you want to hear so that it works with the music. That sort of idea. So be careful when you're playing, especially with hornpipes, because they have that sense of lightness and airiness, but you don't want to let it get away. You don't want to be heavy playing a hornpipe. If you play heavy in a hornpipe, it can really throw other people playing. And it took what was a very light, lively dance step and turned it into something quite heavy and serious. And hornpipes aren't serious. They don't sound serious. So, hopefully this helps a bit in the future with hornpipes, especially with setting yourself up to run it in a more pleasant and more thoughtful way. So hopefully this gives you a little help on that. So thanks for the letter. You know who you are, and hopefully this helps you out even more. Have a good night.